Howdy, Immortalium here, and I genuinely believe that horror is an amazing genre. And I think that one of the things that upsets me a lot about people's attitude to horror is that they disrespect it, that they think it's bad and cheesy, blah 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 blah. When in reality, there's so many horror movies that can really impact you, that can make you think differently, that move you. I think horror is a really powerful medium. Having said all that, I do find myself on occasion wanting to watch a funnily bad horror movie, one that is enjoyable to watch because of how bad it is, and particularly it's really fun to watch these types of movies with my friends. So the first one comes from a franchise that I hold very near and dear to my heart, and I'm actually hoping to discuss a bit more about my thoughts on this franchise in the future. But we'll start off by discussing the fourth Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, The Next Generation. Now this movie is, I think, if you were to look at the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise in terms of quality, because I have actually seen all of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies at this point, I think objectively this is the worst movie. In terms of trying to actually scare you, of creating tension, etc., etc., this movie is an absolute disaster. But because of how disastrous it is, it takes on this really, really funny atmosphere. In particular, I remember when I first watched this movie, there was a scene, I would say maybe a little over halfway through the movie, that I literally could not believe that I was seeing, and I was absolutely laughing my head off. So I actually really ended up enjoying Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation simply because it was a really funny, bad film. And by the way, it is also worth noting that this movie does star pre-celebrities at this point, Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger. And even though I'm not super familiar with them, I've seen a couple of movies with them, but in terms of a lot of the movies that I like to watch, they just don't show up that much in them. But I do still find some amusement in the fact that these very prestigious actors got kind of their early start from doing this movie, which is a very bad movie, but very enjoyable. After that, we're taking a look at the Leprechaun franchise, and there's probably a couple of movies in here that could probably fit into this category, but the one that I think represents this the best is, of course, Leprechaun 4 in Space. Now, Leprechaun 4 in Space, I really wish I knew more about, because I just can't see how they went from Leprechaun 3, which is in Las Vegas, to going into space and doing a sci-fi film. I just don't see how that progressed. But regardless, what we have here is a very messy but very enjoyable bad sci-fi movie featuring the Leprechaun. Of course, Warwick Davis, as always, is absolutely fantastic in the role of the Leprechaun. But in addition to that, we have all sorts of other crazy actions that are taking place in this film, a lot of it feeding into a lot of sci-fi tropes. And just one of those things where you find yourself laughing at how bad some of the special effects are, how over the top some of the performances are, etc., etc. But I ended up actually really enjoying Leprechaun 4 in Space. Leprechaun 4 in Space is an excellent example of a very enjoyable bad movie. After that comes a bit of an exception. I'll explain that in a little bit. But this next movie comes from this collection. It is specifically the fifth Child's Play film, or Chucky movie, whatever you want to call it, called Seed of Chucky. And Seed of Chucky is a little bit different from these other movies in that I genuinely don't see it as a bad movie. I actually quite like Seed of Chucky, but a lot of people don't, and that's why I've decided to include it in this list. So what is it that people don't like about Seed of Chucky? What they probably don't like is the near total lack of horror in the film. And in many ways, it's a much goofier movie that's really trying to emphasize the comedy, in contrast to many prior Child's Play movies. Even Bride of Chucky definitely had more horror than Seed of Chucky does. But I still really enjoy the movie, and that's mainly for a couple of reasons. For one, I absolutely love the relationship and the interactions between Chucky and Tiffany, and that's something that I would actually be a little bit disappointed on when I progressed to Curse of Chucky and Cult of Chucky. It's just that I really liked the back and forth between them. And at this point, I haven't actually watched the TV series, so I don't know if this changes there, but at this point, the most interactivity we've seen between Chucky and Tiffany have been in Bride of Chucky and in Seed of Chucky. And I just think that, again, they're a really funny, enjoyable couple to watch. I think that they really bounce off of each other really well, and because of that, I do find Seed of Chucky to be really enjoyable. I also love the fact that Jennifer Tilly, who voices Tiffany, is playing a fictional version of herself in the movie, and there's some amazing little gags relating to that. And so it's one of those movies that I ended up really enjoying. It's a very funny film to watch. I think it works quite well within the Child's Play universe, and even though a lot of other people don't like it, hence why it's under here as a bad movie, I myself will always have a little bit of a place in my heart for Seed of Chucky, just because I get more of that wonderful relationship between Chucky and Tiffany that I really, really like. And finally, this last movie is also a little different because, in contrast to all of these, which have been franchise movies, movies coming from, large enough horror franchises, this next movie is a standalone film. So recently I watched a bunch of Wes Craven movies. I mentioned this actually in a video in which I was talking about movies that I would strongly recommend that really blew me away. And I ended up watching 15 out of the 20 films that Wes Craven directed. And of course I came across some movies from Wes Craven that I really, really did enjoy. But in terms of bad movies, there's a few in there, but I think the most enjoyably bad movie from Wes Craven that I've seen so far, at least, is Shocker. Now, Shocker, I don't want to say too much about this movie because I think a lot of the joy of watching this movie is being surprised by how the movie progresses. But I do want to emphasize first off that I would argue that the first third of the movie is the least interesting. It plays out as a kind of a very typical serial killer film, and at that point it's quite predictable. What really changes is once it reaches the second act and some more kind of supernatural elements gets introduced. From that point onwards, the movie progressively gets crazier and crazier and crazier, and I absolutely loved that. And it actually culminated in the third act with this scene that I just think is an absolute technical marvel, particularly for a movie that was released in the 80s. It's so over the top and it's so weird, and it's not really scary at all, but I actually really had a lot of fun watching Shocker, particularly the last third of the movie, which I thought actually was pretty amazing. Of how insane it got. So while it's certainly nowhere near Wes Craven at his best, arguably it's one of the worst films that Wes Craven has made, I just absolutely found myself having a blast watching this movie and kind of making fun of a lot of sequences within it. So again, I would definitely recommend that if you're looking for a movie that isn't particularly good, but it kind of goes crazy after a while and becomes really fun to watch, definitely check out Shocker. So those were some of my recommendations for bad movies that I really had a lot of fun watching, and I really would like to hear, of course, a lot of your opinions on the same topic. So of course, for instance, what are some bad horror movies that you've ended up watching that you really enjoyed, and if you have, why? What do you think about these movies? Did you like them? Did you dislike them? Did you consider any of them to be legitimately good movies, like the way that I did with Seed of Chucky? And of course, if you have any additional information about any of these movies, about horror movies in general, please leave it in the comments below. And of course, if you want to support the channel, I would encourage you to use my Amazon affiliate links in the description below. When you purchase horror through those affiliate links, not only supporting me, not only supporting the channel, but you're also supporting the horror industry. So I'd highly encourage you to purchase horror through those affiliate links. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye bye.